Alcoholic mother abandons wheelchair-bound daughter in the park at night alone, until a dog appears and a tragedy horrifies everyone. Elizabeth was sitting on the couch in her small living room, a bottle of liquor in hand. It was another night like so many others, where alcohol was the only thing that seemed to silence the pain inside her. Her face was marked by deep dark circles, her hair disheveled, and her clothes wrinkled, as if she had given up trying to look presentable. Each sip seemed to drown a piece of guilt, sadness, and a life she didn't know how to fix. The addiction had taken over long ago. At first, it was just a way to relax after a hard day. But over the years, the drink became a constant companion, a refuge to escape reality. And that reality was harsh. Elizabeth couldn't hold down a job, was alone, and bore the weight of caring for her daughter, Lily, without any support. But in truth, she hadn't been truly caring for Lily for a long time. Every time she thought about Lily's wheelchair parked in the corner of the house, about the girl's now rare smile, Elizabeth felt a pain so deep that she preferred to escape. Escape to the bottom of a bottle, where there were no judgments or responsibilities. The problem was that the more she fled, the more everything around her crumbled. That night, Elizabeth made a decision that would change everything. She looked at Lily, sitting alone in the living room, and instead of feeling love or guilt, she felt anger. Anger at the life she had, anger at herself, anger at everything. "I can't take this anymore," she muttered to herself, standing up unsteadily. Lily looked at her mother with wide eyes, not understanding what was happening. And for the first time, Elizabeth couldn't look back. She grabbed her coat and left with the girl, not knowing exactly where she was going but with a terribly clear idea in her mind. Lily, only 7 years old, carried a maturity no child should have. She saw what happened to her mother, Elizabeth, even without fully understanding it. She knew the drink was like a monster that took over the woman she loved so much. When her mother was sober, there was still a spark in her eyes, a flicker of affection that made Lily believe things could get better. But those moments were becoming increasingly rare. She knew her mother's desperation. She knew Elizabeth cried alone in the bathroom, that she avoided looking into her daughter's eyes because the guilt seemed too heavy. Lily understood the lack of control, the unsteady gait, the slurred words, and the days when food simply didn't appear on the table. Yet, even so, she never, not for a second, believed her mother would hurt her. Elizabeth was her mother, her only support, even though she was fragile and broken. As hard as it was, Lily always imagined that deep down, there was enough love to protect her. In the girl's mind, a mother's heart was like a fortress, unshakable even in the midst of chaos. That's why, when Elizabeth took her outside on that cold night, Lily suspected nothing. She believed that somehow it was part of a plan, an attempt by her mother to change, perhaps to seek help. It never crossed her mind that, at that moment, Elizabeth was about to do something that would leave a permanent mark. The feeling of betrayal didn't yet exist for Lily. She still saw her mother as someone who, despite being lost, would never stop taking care of her. Still that night, Elizabeth pushed Lily's wheelchair along the dark trails of the park. The sound of gravel under the wheels mingled with the silence of the night, broken only by the rustling of trees in the wind. Lily looked at the sky, trying to spot stars, while gripping the armrest of the chair tightly. Even with the cold beginning to cut into her skin, she believed her mother knew what she was doing. After all, she was her mother. "Where are we going, Mom?" Lily asked in a small, almost uncertain voice. Elizabeth didn't respond immediately. Staggering slightly, she looked around, as if searching for something or trying to escape the guilt that seemed to follow her. "It's just a place for you to rest a bit," Elizabeth said without looking at her. Her voice was heavy, slurred, with that tone Lily knew well when alcohol had taken over. But still, Lily trusted. She always trusted. Suddenly, Elizabeth stopped. They were in a part of the park where the lighting was almost non-existent, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything around. Without saying anything else, she let go of the wheelchair's handles and took a few steps back, breathing deeply as if trying to summon courage. Lily's heart tightened. "Mom," she called, her voice starting to tremble. "What's wrong?" Elizabeth looked at the girl, but her eyes seemed distant, as if she weren't really there. I can't anymore," she murmured, more to herself than to Lily. Then she turned abruptly and started walking away, her steps hurried and unsteady. "Mom, wait!" Lily cried, reaching out in desperation. The wheelchair stood still, solitary in the middle of the park. Elizabeth didn't even look back. Lily stayed there, alone, the cold seeping into her skin and tears beginning to stream down her face. She didn't understand. She didn't want to believe what was happening. A part of her still hoped her mother would come running back, saying it was all a mistake. But the darkness was the only answer she got. Before we continue, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and enjoy hearing their emotional stories. While Lily sat alone in that corner of the park, the silence around her seemed louder than any scream. The trees swayed gently, and the cold wind made the girl curl up in her wheelchair, hugging herself to try and stay warm. Fear grew inside her like a storm ready to explode. With every shadow she saw, her heart raced, and the sound of every branch snapping underfoot made her eyes widen even more. Tears streamed down Lily's face, but she made no sound. It was as if she knew no one would hear her, as if the entire park had forgotten she was there. But then, in the midst of that suffocating darkness, a different sound emerged. It was the sound of light steps, not human, but cautious, as if something or someone was approaching. Lily froze. Her heart felt like it was about to leap out of her chest. Her eyes searched the darkness for the source of the sound, but all she saw were shadows moving between the trees. "Is someone there?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Silence responded for a moment, until a low growl, almost imperceptible, came from somewhere near her. Her breathing quickened. She tried to turn the wheels of her chair, but the uneven ground and her exhaustion prevented her from moving. Then, suddenly, something emerged from the darkness. Two glowing eyes, like yellow lanterns, reflected the park's faint light. Lily froze. A huge dog, a German shepherd with thick black fur, appeared from between the trees. It was imposing, its muzzle slightly raised as it sniffed the air. The animal seemed dangerous, but its movements were calm, almost calculated. Lily held her breath. She didn't know whether to scream, cry, or try to push it away. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice almost gone. The dog stopped a few steps from her, tilting its head as if trying to understand who this fragile, frightened child was. There was no anger in its eyes, but something difficult to explain. It approached slowly, its large paws crunching the gravel on the ground, each step bringing Lily a mix of fear and hope. When it came very close, she closed her eyes, bracing for the worst. But instead of feeling teeth or claws, she felt something warm touch her hand. It was the dog's nose, carefully sniffing her, as if trying to tell her she was safe. You're not going to hurt me?" Lily asked, opening her eyes slowly. The dog simply sat beside her, raising its head like a sentinel, guarding her from something invisible. Lily couldn't explain it, but at that moment, the dog's presence made her fear lessen, if only a little. The night continued to advance, but the dog didn't leave her side. Always alert, it watched its surroundings, ready to act if anything or anyone came near. Lily was still scared, but she felt that this animal, which she decided to call Shadow, was her only hope. And in that instant, Shadow seemed to think the same about her. Shadow didn't leave Lily's side. He seemed to understand that the girl needed protection, even without words. With the cold wind cutting through her skin and the night growing darker, Lily began to shiver. Her arms were tired from hugging herself, and her legs, even immobile, seemed to feel the cold from the ground she couldn't touch. Shadow noticed her discomfort. He looked around, sniffed the air, and, as if he had a plan, circled her quickly. "Are you going to leave me too?" Lily asked softly, her voice trembling with fear. But Shadow wasn't leaving. He just began to nudge the wheelchair with his nose, forcing it to move. At first, Lily was confused. "What are you doing, boy?" But slowly, she realized he was guiding her somewhere. With each firm push, Shadow led the chair along the trail, avoiding branches and potholes. Lily watched everything, trying to understand where he was taking her. The darkness seemed less frightening with Shadow by her side, but still, her heart didn't slow down. Every sound around her, every rustle of leaves brought her fear back. She gripped the arms of her chair tightly, trusting only the instinct of this dog. After a few minutes, Shadow stopped. He began scratching the ground near a hidden corner of the park, where leaves, branches, and old tarps were piled up. Lily looked around, trying to understand. It was a small makeshift shelter, as if someone, or perhaps Shadow himself, had created the space to protect against cold nights. Shadow barked once, softly, as if to say the place was safe. He circled the shelter, pushing leaves and adjusting the tarps with his paws. Then, he sat beside Lily and gently nudged her hand with his nose, as if encouraging her to relax. For the first time since her mother had abandoned her, the girl smiled. "Did you do all this on your own, Shadow?" she asked, a mix of admiration and relief in her voice. Even without words, Shadow seemed to answer with his attentive, calm eyes. He lay beside her, curling up like a warm blanket of fur. Lily adjusted her chair inside the makeshift shelter, feeling a bit less vulnerable. In that moment, one thing became clear: she was no longer alone. Shadow, the mysterious dog who appeared on the scariest night of her life, had become her fortress. Together, they would face whatever came next. And, at least for that night, Lily managed to close her eyes, feeling protected for the first time in a long time. If you've made it this far into the story, keep watching because this story will leave you speechless. Leave a comment saying Shadow is a hero if you loved Shadow's actions. The night was long, but for the first time, Lily didn't feel completely abandoned. Shadow stayed by her side the entire time, alert to every sound, every movement in the darkness. When the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, the gentle light brought a new feeling to the girl, a timid hope, but enough to make her believe that this day could be different. Lily slowly opened her eyes, rubbing her cold hands as she looked at Shadow, who was already on his feet. He seemed to know it was time to move. The dog approached the wheelchair and began nudging it again with his nose, as if to say, "Come on, I'll take you home." "Are you really going to take me home, Shadow?" Lily asked in a faint voice but with a slight smile. Shadow let out a small bark, almost like confirmation. He seemed determined to guide the girl away from that place. As they moved through the park, Shadow was careful, avoiding mud and branches that could hinder the wheelchair's wheels. Lily, even though she was exhausted, felt a small spark of happiness watching the dog's effort. But then, halfway along, something caught her attention. As they passed through an area covered with dry leaves and branches, Shadow suddenly stopped. He sniffed the ground and began digging furiously, scattering leaves everywhere. "What is it now, boy?" Lily asked, trying to see what he had found. With his paws, Shadow unearthed a shiny object partially buried in the soil. Lily leaned as far forward as she could to get a better look. It appeared to be something old, a small metallic crest, dirty with earth but with details that still gleamed in the sunlight. She frowned, curious. "What's this, Shadow?" The dog picked up the crest with his mouth and placed it on Lily's lap. She held the object carefully, examining it. It looked important, as if it held a story she couldn't yet understand. The engraved symbol was strange but somehow familiar, making Lily feel that it wasn't there by chance. "Did you find this for me?" she asked, looking at Shadow, who watched her intently. He wagged his tail slightly, as if he knew he had found something significant. Lily tucked the crest into the pocket of her jacket. She didn't know what it meant, but something inside her told her that this small object would make a difference in her life. Shadow went back to pushing the wheelchair, focused on his goal. He knew the journey was still long but also knew he had to protect Lily at all costs. The girl, now clutching the crest in her pocket, felt that something bigger was coming. It was as if this dog wasn't just helping her get home but guiding her toward something much more important. When Shadow and Lily finally reached her street, the relief was immediate. The journey had been long and full of obstacles, but the dog hadn't given up for even a second. However, the battle was far from over. As soon as a neighbor, Jack, saw Lily's wheelchair being pushed by a dog, he ran toward her. He was shocked and, at the same time, relieved to see her. "Lily, what happened? Where's your mom?" Jack asked, crouching next to the girl. Lily didn't know how to answer. Her words came out trembling. "My mom left me in the park. But Shadow brought me back." "Shadow?" Jack asked, looking at the dog. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Shadow, standing firmly, stayed by Lily's side, watching Jack's every move as if to say, "Be careful what you do." Jack quickly pulled his phone from his pocket and called the police, explaining the situation. Meanwhile, he tried to convince Lily to get into his car so he could take her somewhere safe. "Come on, sweetheart. I'll take you to the station. They'll handle everything," Jack said gently. But then the unexpected happened. Shadow began to growl softly. It wasn't an aggressive growl but a warning. He positioned himself in front of the wheelchair, blocking Jack from moving it. The dog seemed wary, as if protecting Lily from any threat, even if that threat was just the result of past trauma. "Easy, boy. I'm only trying to help," Jack said, attempting to calm the animal. But Shadow didn't seem ready to trust so easily. Lily, noticing Shadow's behavior, stroked his head. "It's okay, Shadow. He's here to help. He won't hurt me." Shadow looked at Lily, as if trying to decide whether to trust. After a few tense moments, he stepped aside but kept his eyes on Jack, ready to act if anything went wrong. Jack carefully picked Lily up and placed her in the back seat of his car. However, when he tried to get Shadow in as well, the dog hesitated. Shadow backed away, lowering his ears. He paced in circles as if nervous. Jack insisted, "Come on, boy. You saved her. Now you can come with us too." But Shadow seemed paralyzed. Maybe it was the sound of the engine, the smell of metal, or just memories he couldn't forget. "Please, Shadow. I need you with me," Lily said, extending her hand to him. The dog looked at her, his eyes full of a mix of fear and loyalty. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, Shadow stepped forward. He climbed into the car slowly, still wary but determined to stay by Lily's side no matter what. With Shadow next to her and the neighbor driving, Lily felt that, for the first time in a long while, things might be okay. But the fear in Shadow's eyes was still a mystery. Something in his past left him uneasy, and Lily knew that the dog who had saved her life also needed a fresh start. Upon arriving at the station, Jack explained the entire situation to the authorities while Lily was taken for a medical evaluation. Shadow stayed by her side the whole time, like a protective shadow, refusing to let anyone approach without his approval. The police began investigating the case immediately, trying to locate Elizabeth, Lily's mother. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that, despite the cold and exhaustion, Lily was okay. The same couldn't be said about her emotional state. She avoided talking about what had happened, focusing all her attention on Shadow, who had become her refuge. "He saved me, you know," Lily said to one of the nurses as she petted the dog. "I wouldn't be here without him." Meanwhile, the police visited Elizabeth's house. The door was unlocked, and the interior reflected the chaos of her life. Empty bottles scattered across the floor, piles of clothes, leftover food on the table. It was clear that Elizabeth was battling more than just alcoholism. It seemed her entire life had fallen apart. After hours of searching, Elizabeth was found at a local bar, her gaze distant and her movements sluggish. When the officers approached, she tried to resist but was too weak to put up a fight. "What do you want from me?" she mumbled, visibly intoxicated. At the station, she was confronted with the truth. "Your daughter was found alone in the park. She could have died there," one of the officers said. Elizabeth lowered her head, her hands trembling. I didn't mean to do it. I just didn't know what to do. I can't take care of her. I can't even take care of myself," she replied through sobs. Social workers were called to assess the case. Elizabeth's confession was clear. She had abandoned Lily because she believed she wasn't capable of being the mother the girl needed. Alcoholism and despair had clouded her ability to see another way out. But this decision destroyed any chance of her keeping custody of Lily. Meanwhile, Lily was in a safe environment at the station, with Shadow lying beside her. The social workers explained that she couldn't go back home with her mother. Lily seemed to already know this. "I don't want to go back," she said softly. "I just want to stay with Shadow." The authorities began searching for a foster family for Lily, someone who could provide the love and care she needed. During the process, one thing became clear: Shadow would be part of the equation. His loyalty and bravery had saved Lily from a terrible fate, and no one could imagine separating them. While Elizabeth awaited trial for neglect and abandonment, Lily began taking her first steps toward a new life. And Shadow? He stayed by her side, as if knowing his work was just beginning. The bond between the two was unbreakable, and everyone who met them knew it was more than luck. It was as if destiny had placed Shadow in Lily's path to save not just her life but also her heart. After days of intense and challenging moments, Lily finally found a new home with Sarah and Michael, a couple who immediately fell in love with her story and the unshakable bond between her and Shadow. As Lily entered the new house, she was surprised. It was simple but full of warmth and care. A room just for her, with walls painted in cheerful colors and carefully chosen toys. For Shadow, there was a comfortable bed near the fireplace, but he still preferred lying next to Lily's wheelchair, as always. In the first days, Lily still carried the fears of her past. At night, the nightmares came with force, flashes of the park, the abandonment, the cold, and the loneliness. But Shadow was there. Whenever she woke up scared, the dog would place his head on her lap, his calm eyes seeming to say, "You're safe now." One day, while playing in the backyard with Shadow, Lily took out the small crest he had found in the park. She kept it in her pocket as if it were a treasure. When Michael saw her with the object, he approached. "What's that, Lily?" he asked, curious. Lily answered with a shy smile, "Shadow found it in the park. I think it's special." Michael took the crest to examine it. It was an old piece of metal, dirty but intriguing. There was an engraved design, a shield with an eagle in the center and letters that seemed to form a name. He decided to show the object to a historian friend who worked at a city museum. When Michael returned with the answer, he brought a story that left everyone speechless. "Lily, this crest is very old. It belonged to a family that lived around here over 100 years ago. They were known for helping people in need, especially children in difficult situations. This symbol represented protection and strength." Lily stayed silent for a moment, looking at Shadow, who sat beside her. "Protection, that's what Shadow did for me. He protected me. He knew what he was doing." To her, the crest was more than an old object found on the ground. It was a sign, proof that Shadow had come into her life for a much greater purpose. Sarah, moved, suggested the crest be framed and placed in Lily's room. "That way, you'll never forget how strong and protected you are," she said. The small object became an important symbol for Lily, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are signs of hope and protection around us. Over time, the house came to life. Lily adapted to her new family, and Shadow became an integral part of it, loved by everyone. The dog, who was once just a shadow in the park, was now a recognized hero. And to Lily, he was more than a friend. He was her guardian, as special as the crest she kept as a treasure. Thus, Lily and Shadow began a new chapter together, showing that even the hardest situations can turn into stories of love, courage, and new beginnings. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments.